Rachel Staudte. A full 12 months before the first phantom illness struck her household, this young woman had already penned their final send-offs. Hidden inside her personal journal, she coldly mapped out the precise moments her own father and brother would perish. She calculated exactly how much brighter her future would look without them. These terrifying premonitions were inked in June 2011. The initial casualty wouldn't drop until Easter Sunday the subsequent year. Before the nightmare began, the Staudtes occupied an unassuming 900-square-foot residence in Springfield, Missouri. 61-year-old Mark Staudte anchored a local blues group known as Messing with Destiny as their frontman and lead guitarist. His 51-year-old wife, Diane, balanced her clinical work and health insurance with playing the organ for the Redeemer Lutheran congregation. The couple raised 4 children. 26-year-old Shaun, diagnosed on the autism spectrum, remained under their roof. 24-year-old Sarah held dual degrees in history and French from Missouri State University, yet she sat jobless, drowning in academic debt. Next came Rachel, the undeniable favorite. She was a gifted flutist, a choir vocalist, and a deeply artistic intellectual. Law enforcement officials would eventually reflect on her profound intellect, noting she possessed the raw potential to change the world for the better. Rounding out the siblings was little Brianna, a 9-year-old girl struggling with cognitive delays. Diane made zero effort to hide her fierce preference for Rachel, constantly showering her with digital praise online while bitterly lamenting the existence of her other offspring. Detectives would ultimately unearth a deeply disturbing reality, a highly calculated, lethal pact forged between a mother and her favorite daughter. Operating as a unit, the pair scoured the dark corners of the internet for execution methods, ultimately choosing ethylene glycol, the deadly active ingredient found in antifreeze. They deliberately tracked down a specific formula completely devoid of bittering agents, ensuring their poison would slip past their victims' taste buds unnoticed. The lethal dosage was then quietly stirred into their own blood relatives' drinks. Mark succumbed to the toxin on April 8, 2012. It happened to be Easter Sunday. Coroners completely missed the foul play, chalking it up to natural failing. He was quickly turned to ash. Diane promptly pocketed a $20,000 death benefit, using the fresh capital to relocate the surviving family into a far more spacious house. A mere 5 months passed before tragedy struck again. 26-year-old Shaun flatlined on September 2, 2012. Once more, the medical establishment blamed pre-existing conditions, and his remains were incinerated. But by June 2013, Sarah's health started rapidly collapsing. Rushed to Cox South Hospital, she presented with massive internal hemorrhaging and failing organs. Medical professionals gave her absolutely 0% odds of making it out alive. Interrogators questioned why they sought medical care for Sarah instead of letting her fade quietly at home. Rachel's response was nothing short of bone-chilling. She coldly explained that she couldn't tolerate another corpse in their residence, claiming that a dwelling becomes utterly repulsive once death has tainted it. What dark psychological shift forces a young woman to view her own flesh and blood as mere nuisances requiring extermination? The entire house of cards began to collapse thanks to a single, unnamed informant. On June 11, 2013, local law enforcement fielded a crucial phone call from Jeff Sippy, the spiritual leader of the Redeemer Lutheran congregation. He voiced his deep suspicions regarding Shaun's sudden demise, noting that Diane displayed an alarming, unnatural void of maternal sorrow. Several close associates had independently witnessed that exact same emotional detachment. A fellow musician noted that Diane treated her husband's memorial like a festive social gathering, utterly devoid of mourning. Simultaneously, physicians at Cox South were already questioning the origins of Sarah's mysterious ailments. Conventional toxicology panels repeatedly failed to identify the root cause of her catastrophic decline. Behind the scenes, a deeper forensic analysis of Shaun's preserved tissue samples finally unmasked the invisible killer, ethylene glycol. By June 20, 2013, Diane walked into the precinct of her own free will. Before long, her horrific taped admission echoed through the interrogation room. She viciously declared that she despised her husband, branded her own son a severe nuisance, and condemned Sarah for her joblessness and mounting collegiate debt. A subsequent raid of Rachel's private quarters yielded a terrifying piece of evidence. the secret journal concealed within her wardrobe. That infamous June 2011 passage read, "It breaks my heart knowing my dad will perish within 2 months. My brother Shaun will be next to go. It is going to be a difficult transition, but things will ultimately align perfectly." A dark verse tucked inside her handbag whispered a grim prophecy. Only the quiet ones will remain, just my mother, my younger sister, and myself. Faced with this damning material on June 22nd, the golden child finally cracked. On May 5th, 2015, Rachel formally accepted a plea deal, admitting culpability to a pair of downgraded second-degree murder charges. The agreement also included single counts of first-degree assault and armed criminal action, completely contingent upon her turning state's evidence against her own mother. Justice was finally handed down by Judge Thomas Mountjoy on March 1st, 2016. The magistrate handed her dual concurrent life terms, strategically stacked alongside 2 additional consecutive 20-year blocks behind bars. During the final hearing, Rachel recited an apology to Sarah, the lone survivor who now battles severe, irreversible brain and organ trauma. The convicted killer expressed deep regret for lacking the moral fortitude to sound the alarm and shield her siblings from the slaughter. Taking the stand, Sarah delivered a hauntingly powerful statement. She boldly rejected the title of victim, embracing her status as a survivor, and remarkably granted her mother full forgiveness. Governed by Missouri statutes, the prison doors will not even be considered for opening until 2055, keeping Rachel locked away for roughly 42 years post-conviction. As the calendar turned to early 2026, she remained securely locked behind bars. Now, roughly 35 years of age, she serves her time within the cold walls of the Women's Eastern Reception Diagnostic and Correctional Center in Vandalia, Missouri. Forced to completely relearn fundamental motor and verbal skills, Sarah Staudte now resides in an assisted living facility under a state-appointed guardian's watchful eye. In defiance of her profound neurological damage, she sought refuge in music, actively mastering both the bass guitar and the violin. Securing an Alford plea, Diane Staudte was condemned to a lifelong sentence without the possibility of parole. However, during a 2022 prison interview, she chillingly retracted her entire confession. A mother's connection to her offspring is traditionally revered as sacred, yet, in certain shadowy corners of the human psyche, that devotion mutates into something horrifyingly unrecognizable. Enter Madison Wine, a panicked voice crying out to 911 dispatchers from a neighboring property, hysterically reporting that her own residence was engulfed in an inferno. Deep within that blazing Davisville, West Virginia structure, her adoptive mother and father lay motionless in their bedroom, having suffered irreversible, fatal trauma. While a helpless 6-year-old remained hopelessly trapped amid the roaring flames, 16-year-old Madison watched from the outside. Her tragic genesis began early, severed from her biological caretakers at just 2 years old amid rampant narcotic abuse, and tragically displaced yet again by age 6. Born into a shadowy world of maternal heroin addiction and sex work, a young Madison later confided a haunting secret and attempted violation by a family member. The maternal response offered zero comfort, only a chilling revelation. The exact same relative had previously subjected her mother to identical horrors. Compounding this grim generational trauma, her biological father inevitably succumbed to a fatal narcotic overdose. Salvation supposedly arrived via adoption by her 52-year-old biological grandmother, Charlotte Taylor, and 58-year-old Robert Taylor, a couple universally described as desperately trying to cultivate a stable home environment. Taking the stand years later, Robert's former spouse, Sherry B., recalled how warmly and affectionately he always spoke of his newly adopted daughter. He beamed with pride over her early high school graduation, actively preparing to finance her university tuition while encouraging her participation in athletics and the Reserve Officers Training Corps. Beneath this facade of normalcy lay a deeply fractured psyche, treated psychiatrically from 2007 until 2018. Defense attorneys painted her as chronically suicidal and plagued by severe afflictions. In the pitch-black hours just past midnight on May 5, 2019, Robert, Charlotte, and the young 6-year-old child lay fast asleep. While the child documented legally as MT slept securely, the teenager quietly retrieved a heavy container of liquid accelerant. Her initial, sinister experiment involved igniting gasoline-filled styrofoam cups. When this crude ignition failed, the discarded remnants were carelessly tossed into a nearby waste bin. Escalating her lethal design, she systematically drenched the residents in fuel, deliberately pooling the combustible liquid directly outside the bedroom doors of her slumbering family. Striking the fateful match, she transformed the sanctuary into a roaring inferno, ultimately leaving Robert and Charlotte Taylor to perish, side by side in their bed. Alongside 3 tragically doomed family canines, the unresponsive 6-year-old was dragged from the suffocating smoke, miraculously resuscitated by desperate first responders, and eventually nursed back to health. Investigators wasted no time officially ruling the blaze an act of deliberate arson, with Deputy Fire Marshal Jason Baltic spearheading the intensive forensic inquiry. Before the glowing embers had even fully cooled that very same afternoon, authorities formally placed the teenage girl in handcuffs. Over the course of a tense, 43-minute interrogation tape, she concocted a story about a mysterious explosion until Baltic's relentless pressure shattered her alibi, prompting a chilling confession to the arson. Reflecting on her eerily stoic disposition, the lead prosecutor characterized her as a highly calculating youth, demonstrating total mastery over both her emotional state and her deadly conduct. One must ask the terrifying psychological question: what dark alchemy of severe childhood trauma and cold-blooded calculation drives a teenager to incinerate her only family while they sleep? By September 2019, the judicial system decreed that the adolescent would face the severe, uncompromising consequences of an adult tribunal. A crushing 7-count grand jury indictment swiftly materialized, hitting her with twin charges of first-degree murder, paired with 2 allegations of felony homicide and a count of aggravated arson. The harrowing docket was finalized with the attempted slaughter of a minor and vicious animal cruelty, prompting her legal counsel to desperately pivot toward an insanity plea. The courtroom drama unfolded between April 11th and 14th, 2022, gripping the Wood County Circuit Court under the stern gavel of Judge J.D. Bean. Spearheading the state's fierce offensive, Special Prosecutor Josh Downey painted a picture of icy premeditation, spotlighting her precise distribution of liquid fuel and her chilling persistence following an initially botched ignition. Taking the stand for the prosecution, forensic psychologist Dr. Timothy Sarr delivered a damning assessment. The defendant possessed full cognitive capacity to harbor malice aforethought and execute a premeditated kill. Conversely, the defense desperately attempted to reframe the narrative, anchoring their entire strategy on the catastrophic, mind-altering abuse she endured throughout her formative years. Their retained specialist, Dr. Roy Lubit, posited a theory of psychological fragmentation, testifying that her deeply scarred psyche rendered her completely incapable of projecting the logical, fatal consequences of her actions. He asserted she was blinded by a tragic delusion, a twisted fantasy wherein sparking a minor, contained blaze would merely frighten her guardians into granting her ultimate independence. Standing before the judge to face her ultimate fate, the young woman obstinately clung to the narrative that her catastrophic inferno was never an intentional slaughter, but rather a horribly botched accident. The panel of her peers remained entirely unconvinced. Following a mere 3 to 5 hours of tense deliberation, they returned a sweeping guilty verdict across all 7 horrific charges. On the somber morning of September 22, 2022, Judge Bean delivered his final, merciless decree by handing down the absolute maximum penalties allowable by law. Stacked consecutively, the devastating toll amounted to double life terms, plus 20 years for the blaze, another 3 to 15 for the near-fatal assault on the child, and 1 to 5 years for the doomed pets. Yet, owing to a controversial legal loophole regarding her juvenile status during the massacre, West Virginia statutes mandate she must be granted a parole hearing after merely 15 years behind bars. As the world moves forward into early 2026, the orchestrator of this nightmare remains deeply embedded within the labyrinthine West Virginia Division of Corrections apparatus. With an anticipated release review looming around 2034, an eerie silence surrounds her case, devoid of any publicly disclosed appellate victories or modern legal maneuvers. Perhaps the darkest epitaph of this tragedy came during the sentencing hearing, when a grieving Sherry B. stated her sole remaining prayer: that the adolescent perpetrator would suffer the absolute maximum payment for her monstrous betrayal. The ultimate goal was to ensure she never tasted freedom again. Special Prosecutor Downey grimly noted that there was no room for celebration here. A heavy cloud of tragedy hung over the resolution. Madison Wine had endured a childhood marked by unimaginable trauma, suffering through horrors no human should ever face. Yet, even that profound psychological scarring could not wash away the sheer brutality of what unfolded that fateful afternoon. In the eyes of the law, an explanation rarely serves as an absolute excuse, leaving the justice system to grapple with the agonizing weight of both. The case of Elizabeth Shannon is chilling. When homicide detectives informed the 15-year-old that her adoptive father had been violently attacked, her immediate reaction was a single, unsettling inquiry. With an unnerving calm, she asked, "Is he dead?" Major David Shannon was a 40-year-old military computer specialist, dutifully stationed at Fort Bragg in Fayetteville, North Carolina. He had legally taken in Elizabeth and her older sibling, Daisy, shortly after marrying their mother, Joan Myrtle Shannon, back in 1991. The suburban household was rounded out by two younger half-brothers, the biological offspring of Joan and David's union. But behind the veneer of suburban normalcy, darkness festered. Joan and David were active in the local swinging scene, producing amateur explicit films and regularly engaging in intimate group encounters. During this time, Joan had quietly cultivated a passionate, illicit affair with another active duty soldier by the name of Jeffrey Wilson. Complicating matters, David was insured for over $700,000, a massive financial windfall that named Joan as the sole beneficiary. Elizabeth, born from the ashes of Joan's turbulent first marriage, was already a troubled youth, recently expelled from her school for relentlessly instigating brawls. She carried a dark reputation for severe behavioral instability. Yet, the grim events of July 23, 2002 were far from a simple act of reckless teenage rebellion. This execution was meticulously engineered by Joan Shannon over a span of months. Her initial, sinister plot involved slipping poison to her unsuspecting husband. When that failed, she interrogated Daisy about scoring lethal narcotics, eventually shifting focus to manipulate Elizabeth into hiring a hitman. The teenager actually propositioned two peers. Both naturally backed out. Undeterred, Joan took drastic measures, fully loading David's personal firearm, gathering surgical gloves, and stashing the kill kit inside Elizabeth's dresser. In a chilling display of maternal guidance, she methodically instructed her daughter on exactly how to operate the deadly firearm. As the shadows lengthened on the night of July 22nd into the 23rd, Joan calmly announced that she and David were retiring for the evening. Shortly after 11 at night, Elizabeth donned layers of clothing and the latex gloves, slipped into the master suite, and fired the weapon at her slumbering father from point-blank range. Hearing the terrifying sound of him still clinging to life, she coldly pulled the trigger a second time. Feigning terror, Joan crawled toward the telephone, commanding Elizabeth and a sleepover guest named Vera Thompson to make the firearm vanish. It remains missing to this day. It was then that Joan uttered a deeply incriminating phrase, murmuring that she needed to find a reason to cry before finally dialing 911. She wailed into the receiver about a phantom home invader, but investigators instantly found her panicked narrative to be highly questionable. The residence showed absolutely no signs of forced entry. Zero valuables had been taken, and the blood-soaked scene simply did not match a botched burglary. Detectives quickly noted that for a newly grieving widow, Joan appeared unnervingly composed and remarkably devoid of genuine sorrow. A faceless tip-off, pointing the finger at Elizabeth, steered authorities toward Vera Thompson, who quickly crumbled under the pressure. The teenage trigger woman was soon discovered cowering beneath a trailer park bed. Her confession was bone-chillingly simple, consisting of just a few words. "I was only following my mother's orders." It begs a dark psychological question. Where does the true guilt lie when a vulnerable adolescent becomes a lethal instrument wielded by a parent? On June 11, 2004, Elizabeth struck a plea deal for second-degree murder and conspiracy, agreeing to testify against her mother in exchange for a 25 to 31-year sentence. Standing before the judge, she expressed what seemed like profound remorse, acknowledging the utterly catastrophic nature of her actions. She tearfully vowed to carry the heavy burden of her shame forever. Meanwhile, Joan Shannon faced her reckoning on August 15, 2005, inside Judge James Hardin's Cumberland County courtroom. The prosecution's most devastating weapon against the matriarch was her own daughter, taking the stand as the star witness. Following a grueling 9-hour deliberation process, the jury returned a damning verdict: guilty of first-degree murder, conspiracy, and acting as an accessory after the fact. Joan was slapped with a life sentence completely devoid of parole, plus an additional 13 years. Interestingly, her 2007 appeal unexpectedly altered the landscape of North Carolina jurisprudence. The appellate decision set a mandatory precedent, forcing state prosecutors to fully disclose any witness statements extracted during preliminary interviews. This monumental legal shift prompted state lawmakers to completely overhaul and rewrite criminal discovery statutes during the stifling summer of 2007. Fast forward to early 2026, and Elizabeth Shannon is still locked away within the concrete walls of the North Carolina Correctional Institution for Women in Raleigh. Factoring in her accumulated good behavior credits, the system currently projects her return to society around November of 2027. However, official records paint a turbulent picture behind bars, revealing a staggering tally of over 30 disciplinary infractions during her confinement. In a bizarre twist of family loyalty, David's surviving relatives, including his sister, Brenda Strong, and sister-in-law, Virginia Shands, vehemently defended Joan, placing the blame squarely on Elizabeth's shoulders. They publicly branded the teenager as an evil, vindictive monster, leaving the surviving family unit hopelessly and permanently fractured. The bloodshed at Fort Bragg was far from an isolated incident. It belonged to a dark, notorious cluster of 5 military spouse fatalities tied to the very same installation. All of these grim tragedies unfolded within a bloody 6-week window in 2002, forcing the military to launch a massive probe into their failing domestic violence protocols. It serves as a haunting reminder that in certain twisted bloodlines, the very guardians sworn to keep you safe are the ones slipping the murder weapon into your trembling hands. We now turn to the sinister tale of Suzanne von Richthofen. A mere 48 hours before her 19th birthday, she decided to kick off her celebrations a little early. Deep in the heart of Sao Paulo, Brazil, she slipped into an opulent motel suite, outfitted with a private pool and a bubbling jacuzzi. The nightly rate ran exactly 318 reais. Just 2 hours prior, her mother and father had been brutally slaughtered, while her 15-year-old sibling remained utterly oblivious to the horror. The von Richthofens were the absolute pinnacle of Sao Paulo's affluent, highly educated upper crust. Patriarch Manfred Albert von Richthofen, aged 49, was a formidable German-born engineer who directed a major state highway enterprise. His wife, 50-year-old Marija, practiced as an esteemed psychiatrist. Together, they resided inside a sprawling mansion in the exclusive Brooklyn Velho district, boasting a fortune nearing 5.5 million reais. Their daughter, Suzanne, was groomed at a prestigious German academy, commanded 3 distinct languages with ease, and studied law within the hallowed halls of the Pontifical Catholic University. Her lover, Daniel Cravinhos de Paula e Silva, belonged to a gritty, parallel reality. At 21, he lacked formal schooling, drifted between odd jobs, and habitually abused marijuana. His older brother, 26-year-old Christian, carried a darker history, having endured institutionalization for a severe cocaine habit. Unearthing Daniel's sordid past, the matriarch and patriarch swiftly forbade the romance. Later, when Suzanne demanded her father purchase a private apartment for the couple, he vehemently denied her. This massacre was not a crime of passion, but an execution of chilling precision. On the night of October 31st, 2002, Suzanne methodically neutralized the estate's security cameras and alarm grid. Using a fabricated birthday celebration as a clever decoy, the lovers deposited her 15-year-old brother, Andreas, at a local cyber cafe. As the clock struck midnight, the sinister trinity, Suzanne, Daniel, and Christian, navigated quietly back toward the darkened family estate. Slipping inside first, the daughter verified her parents were in a deep slumber before gesturing for her accomplices to follow. Daniel delivered the lethal, crushing blows to Manfred. Christian turned his fury upon Marisia, both assailants swinging heavy iron pipes. Later, forensic analysts would uncover shattered bones in Marizia's hands, a desperate, futile attempt to shield her face. As the dying mother choked out agonizing gasps, her killers ruthlessly forced a towel down her throat to guarantee absolute silence. Throughout the gruesome slaughter, Suzanne lingered calmly on the ground floor. Afterward, the trio orchestrated a chaotic faux robbery, tearing through rooms to loot high-value items. By 1:36 in the morning, the couple secured their lavish motel retreat. Departing at 2:55, they retrieved Andreas, drove back to the blood-soaked residence, and performed a hysterical charade of discovering the bodies. Yet, the fabricated break-in immediately triggered psychological red flags among seasoned homicide detectives. Strewn documents looked meticulously arranged rather than frantically tossed. The deactivated security system and targeted looting of hidden quarters pointed unmistakably toward an inside job. Inside the precinct, the murderous couple openly shared intimate kisses and tender caresses, contrasting sharply with a traumatized, sobbing Andreas huddled nearby. The very next afternoon, Suzanne casually splashed in the family pool alongside Daniel. Mere hours after watching her parents lowered into the earth, she threw a festive birthday gathering with companions. One must wonder, what is the true price of wealth when a child eagerly slaughters her own blood to seize it? Detectives caught a monumental break when Christian inexplicably bought a motorcycle, dropping stacks of crisp 100 real notes that wildly eclipsed his legitimate income. The facade completely crumbled on November 9, 2002. A mere 9 days following the massacre, relentless interrogations broke all three conspirators into full, graphic confessions. Judicial proceedings ignited on July 17, 2006, at the Sao Paulo Criminal Forum, overseen by Judge Alberto Anderson Filho and a 7-member jury. The colossal investigative dossier stretched across 14 thick volumes, totaling 2,800 pages. State prosecutor Roberto Tardelli painted the daughter as a cold, calculating architect, driven entirely by an insatiable financial lust. At exactly 3 in the morning on July 22nd, the gavel fell. The primary architects, Suzanne and Daniel, were handed identical sentences of 39 years and 6 months. Christian absorbed a slightly reduced penalty of 38 years and 6 months. However, the Brazilian Penal Code dictates an absolute maximum incarceration limit of 30 years, no matter the ruling. By February 2011, a magistrate officially declared Suzanne legally unworthy, branding her forever unfit to claim a single cent of the blood-stained family fortune. Consequently, in March 2015, the orphaned Andreas inherited the entire estate. By early 2026, the remorseless architect of the slayings was no longer locked in a cell. She had transitioned to an open regime, essentially walking on conditional liberty on January 11, 2023. Having spent roughly 20 years behind bars, she legally rebranded herself as Suzanne Louise Magnani Muniz in December 2023. She soon wed a medical practitioner, welcoming a baby boy into the world on January 27, 2024. Today, she pursues a law degree, manages a modest digital craft shop, and quietly resides within the tranquil borders of Aguas de Lindóia in Sao Paulo state. Her movement remains tethered by a mandatory electronic ankle bracelet. Meanwhile, her former lover Daniel has enjoyed open regime privileges since 2018. Christian secured his own conditional release in March 2025, meaning all three executioners now roam free under strict state supervision. Conversely, the only innocent survivor of the von Richthofen lineage, Andreas, has navigated a tragic, agonizing existence. Allegedly consumed by substance abuse, he now dwells as a total recluse on an overgrown, desolate farm, devoid of digital communication or internet access, while battling 24 separate lawsuits over unpaid debts. Desperate to mend severed ties, the paroled sister arrived at his doorstep in September 2025, baby in tow. The traumatized brother completely rejected her, threatening swift law enforcement intervention if she remained. It stands as a chilling reminder. Certain psychological scars never close, and profound betrayals can never be washed clean, even by shared DNA. Sarah Marie Johnson, a discarded bathrobe, held the gruesome truth of her dark tale. Upon pulling the garment from the household trash bin, detectives discovered horrifying evidence: A microscopic mist of high-velocity blood spatter from two individuals, deeply woven with trace elements of gunshot residue. The suspected phantom was a mere 16 years of age. She had callously trashed the bloodied garment shortly after executing her mother and father on the crisp morning of September 2nd, 2003. The tragic victims had built their seemingly idyllic lives in Bellevue, Idaho, a quiet, unassuming municipality nestled just outside the scenic ridges of Sun Valley. 46-year-old Alan Johnson helped run a local landscaping business, while his 52-year-old wife, Diane, spent her days working at a nearby medical clinic. Meanwhile, Sarah's older half-brother, Matt, was safely miles away, studying at the University of Idaho. The couple had been childhood sweethearts, sharing a lifelong bond and a shared passion for trap shooting down at the Blaine County Gun Club. Outwardly, Sarah appeared sharp and athletic, yet beneath the surface lurked severe clinical depression and a past suicide attempt, fueling a deeply toxic, venomous dynamic with her mother. Several witnesses later took the stand, recounting chilling moments when the teenager openly declared an intense, unyielding hatred for her own mother. Their verbal sparring frequently spiraled into explosive, physically violent altercations behind closed doors. The primary catalyst was her romance with 19-year-old Bruno Santos, an undocumented immigrant her parents fiercely rejected, leading to an exceptionally hostile Labor Day weekend just before the bloodbath. The final straw snapped when Alan caught his daughter in a web of lies she had spent the night at Santos's apartment rather than a friend's house as promised. Furious, Alan confronted the older boy and confined Sarah to the house while he and Diane quietly deliberated pursuing severe statutory charges against Santos. Sometime within the hauntingly quiet window of 6:20 and 7 o'clock on the morning of September 2nd, a dark plan was set in motion. Draped in a soft pink bathrobe over a simple tee, Sarah slipped into the unlocked closet of a tenant's guest cottage and quietly secured a hunting rifle. With the tenant, Mel Spiegel, away on vacation, the teenager crept into her parents' bedroom and coldly fired a devastating, point-blank round directly into her slumbering mother's head. Without missing a beat, she leveled the smoking barrel at her father, blasting a round straight through his chest the moment he stepped from the shower. Gravely wounded, Alan stumbled to his dying wife's bedside before finally collapsing and bleeding out, leaving behind a crime scene dripping with calculated, meticulous premeditation. Investigators soon discovered a loaded magazine containing 6 rounds, carefully concealed within a bandana, resting ominously right on the teenager's nightstand. 5 entirely different, mismatched bullets rattled inside her bathrobe pocket, a chilling clue hinting that her initial murderous intent involved a completely separate firearm. In a crude, theatrical attempt to mislead police, kitchen knives had been deliberately planted at the foot of the master bed and tossed into her brother's vacant room. The murder weapon's scope lay discarded on Spiegel's bed in a blatant effort to frame the absent tenant, but Sheriff Walt Femling quickly made a brilliant, game-changing tactical maneuver. Intercepting a local garbage truck, the sheriff successfully secured the family's refuse bins, miraculously preserving the blood-stained bathrobe, discarded gloves, and a treasure trove of damning forensic clues. Inside those bins, detectives unearthed a left-handed leather glove, heavily contaminated with telltale traces of gunshot residue. Even more incriminating was a right-handed latex glove, its inner lining silently holding undeniable, irrefutable strands of Sarah's own genetic material. Shrapnel embedded in Sarah's doorframe definitively proved both bedroom doors were wide open during the slaughter, completely shattering her alibi of sleeping soundly behind a closed door. Dark, purplish contusions blooming across her left shoulder perfectly mirrored the violent, unmistakable kickback of a high-powered rifle. Investigators initially zeroed in on Santos, but a complete absence of his DNA at the bloody scene swiftly cleared his name, leaving authorities grappling with an unthinkable reality. The killer was the victim's own flesh and blood. Sheriff Femling's suspicions deepened as he observed the teenager's chillingly detached demeanor. She simply perched on a wooden fence, passively watching her parents in body bags being wheeled away. Her displays of sorrow felt hollow and deeply unconvincing, especially considering she was strangely fixated on keeping her upcoming hair and nail appointments. By mid-October, state forensic technicians definitively matched her genetic markers to the discarded glove, leading to her swift arrest on October 29, 2003. Yet, The young woman never broke, steadfastly maintaining a stubborn, unwavering claim of innocence that has lasted for more than 2 decades. Suffocating media frenzy surrounding the gruesome patricide forced a change of venue, shifting the high-stakes trial to the Ada County Courthouse over in Boise. The grueling, 5-week judicial spectacle became a national obsession when Court TV began broadcasting the chilling proceedings live in February 2005. Prosecutor Jim Thomas laid out a devastating forensic timeline, painting a portrait of a greedy daughter who slaughtered her parents to freely date Santos and gorge herself on a massive inheritance. A parade of witnesses took the stand, including a jailhouse informant who recounted dark conversations where Sarah bragged about violent maternal feuds and suddenly altered life insurance payouts. Desperate to cast doubt, defense attorney Robert Pangburn aggressively peddled a shadowy alternative narrative, pointing the finger of blame squarely at Santos and a phantom network of accomplices. The jury saw right through the smoke and mirrors, decisively convicting Sarah on 2 horrifying counts of first-degree murder on March 16, 2005. Judge Barry Wood showed zero leniency, condemning the teenager to 2 concurrent fixed life terms behind bars, totally stripping away any hope of parole, while tacking on an additional 15 years for using a firearm. In a chilling closing remark, the magistrate bluntly noted that had the state pursued capital punishment, her heinous crimes made her the absolute perfect candidate for the death penalty. Addressing the silent courtroom, Matt Johnson delivered a devastating blow, testifying that his sister harbored no true remorse and would absolutely kill again, only next time she would cover her tracks perfectly. Over the ensuing years, Sarah launched a relentless barrage of legal appeals, all of which crashed and burned, beginning with an initial petition dismissed simply because it was filed too late. A desperate post-conviction petition was swiftly struck down, and even a subsequent motion backed by the Idaho Innocence Project ultimately met the exact same dead-end fate. The Idaho Supreme Court firmly upheld her draconian conviction in 2017, while the highest court in the land, the United States Supreme Court, flatly refused to even review the case. Her legal luck continued its downward spiral when a federal judge coldly denied her petition for habeas corpus in 2019. The final nail in the coffin came on October 30th, 2024, when the notoriously strict Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals thoroughly affirmed the lower court's rulings. Following this absolute legal exhaustion as of early 2026, Sarah Marie Johnson remains entombed within the bleak walls of the Pocatello Women's Correctional Center in Idaho. Now hovering around 39 years of age, she faces a grim, inescapable reality: 2 back-to-back fixed life sentences with absolutely zero prospect of ever walking free. With the Ninth Circuit's sweeping 2024 decision effectively annihilating her last remaining shreds of federal appellate hope, she remains a locked-away enigma who, to this very day, refuses to confess her dark sins. The Idaho Innocence Project still fiercely champions her ongoing legal battle. If this grim descent into human psychology captivates you, now is the moment to subscribe. We unearth fresh, chilling investigations daily. Secure your subscription so the next dark narrative never slips by. The Cynthia Alvarez File. Mere days after orchestrating the brutal demise of her parents, this teenager casually browsed a local party city for festive Halloween decorations. All the while, her mother's lifeless body lay concealed in the back of their Jeep Cherokee. Just 15 years old, she inhabited a cramped Compton trailer shared with her 58-year-old mother, Gloria Vialta, and her 51-year-old stepfather, Jose Lara. Early in her childhood, her biological father was permanently exiled to Honduras. Visually impaired and diabetic, the teen attended special education classes at Dominguez High School, battling a severe cognitive language deficit. Within those very walls, she crossed paths with her boyfriend, Giovanni Gallardo, known to peers simply as Johnny. At 16, Johnny possessed a meager 57 intelligence quotient. Completely illiterate, he suffered from profound, medically documented developmental delays. Behind closed doors, the girl alleged horrific domestic torment, claiming her mother violently thrashed her using metal-studded belts or nearby heavy objects. She also whispered of inappropriate, predatory behavior from Lara. Though she initially alerted police, she abruptly withdrew the claims, citing maternal intimidation. Meanwhile, relatives of Lara vehemently denounced these dark accusations as complete fabrications. Defense counsel Carol Taylor later painted a grim portrait of a teenager held virtually captive. This macabre slaughter was meticulously orchestrated weeks prior. Triggered by a maternal ultimatum demanding they separate, the forbidden lovers started whispering about permanently eliminating her parents. Come October 12, 2011, Johnny approached, gripping a literal murder kit, packing a heavy baseball bat, a tactical mask, and rubbing alcohol. Biding their time in total silence, the youthful conspirators plotted their strike through frantic scribbles in a spiral notebook. One chilling entry read, "I am too terrified. I cannot execute this." Followed by, "What if she falls asleep? Could you erase her?" And finally, "You handle it." As the daughter lingered outside, her boyfriend ruthlessly subdued the mother. Binding her tightly, they dragged her limp body away. Returning from his shift, the oblivious stepfather was ambushed by two skull-cracking blows. Stepping from the shadows, she ruthlessly battered his legs. As the desperate man fumbled for a pocket knife, she kicked it away, coldly fetching a kitchen blade that her lover plunged fatally. In a chilling display of detachment, the murderous duo spent days dismantling the dead man's trucks. Pawning off her dead mother's jewelry, they funded a festive Halloween celebration, eventually dumping the rotting corpses into shallow, muddy graves scattered across desolate lots in Long Beach and Norwalk. How could two neurologically compromised adolescents engineer a bloodbath with such cold, terrifying precision? On October 15th, a passing jogger finally stumbled upon the rotting remains of Gloria. By October 17th, a suspicious absence prompted his employer to alert the police. Detectives breached the ransacked trailer, ultimately uncovering that highly incriminating, blood-stained diary of death. Brought into interrogation on October 19th, the teen immediately pointed fingers at her lover, yet coldly detailed the entire massacre. Gallardo subsequently delivered a comprehensive, horrifying confession. On October 21st, 2011, prosecutors indicted both juveniles as adults, slapping them with twin counts of premeditated murder alongside special enhancements. By spring 2013, the accused teenager faced Judge Ricardo Ocampo inside the imposing walls of the Compton Superior Court. Prosecutor Christine Trudich called the evidence insurmountable. Cynthia ultimately took the stand. Under oath, she blamed Gallardo for both murders. Yet, she coldly confessed to penning those lethal notes, bludgeoning her stepfather, passing the murder weapon, and running festive errands while her mother rotted in the trunk. It took jurors barely 3 hours to pierce her defense. By May 10th, 2013, they delivered a devastating guilty verdict featuring all special enhancements. Justice moved faster for her accomplice. His jury sealed his fate in under 2 hours on May 29th. On January 24th, 2014, the 17-year-old mastermind earned 50 years behind bars. Her loyal foot soldier received life without parole entirely. An appellate court later overturned the predatory lying-in-wait enhancement due to her minor status, yet those crushing convictions and original massive sentences remained firmly intact. However, the court recognized a faint loophole via California Senate Bill 260. This pivotal legislation birthed specialized juvenile parole reviews, coded deeply within Penal Code Section 3051. By early 2026, this convicted killer sits confined within the bleak walls of the California correctional system, bound entirely by those specific penal guidelines. She will only earn the privilege to beg for freedom after surviving a quarter-century trapped in a cell. The calendar must crawl to 2038 or 39 before that happens. No hearings have transpired yet. The ink-smeared pages of a cheap notebook handed detectives the terrifying blueprint of the massacre. Yet, the psychological rot that bred such unfathomable evil remains a deeply horrifying enigma. Next, the tragic mystery surrounding little Sarah Grace Patrick. On the grim morning of February 20th, 2025, a child stepped into the master bedroom, finding both parents completely riddled with bullets. Hours drifted by before her 16-year-old half-sibling, Sarah Grace Patrick, finally dialed 911. Now, that same teenager faces accusations of orchestrating the cold-blooded massacre. Her day of reckoning is slated for August 2026. The teenager resided in Carrollton, Georgia, alongside her 41-year-old mother, Kristen, and her 45-year-old stepfather, James Brock, known to locals simply as Jaime. Their union was sealed in December 2023, following a highly turbulent and explosive romance. James harbored a dark, narcotic-riddled rap sheet, while a mechanical pump barely kept his failing, diseased heart beating inside his chest. While he awaited a transplant, legal records unmasked a chillingly dysfunctional and fractured family dynamic. During a 2018 divorce, Sarah's biological father explicitly accused Kristen of rampant prescription medication abuse. By November 2019, Daniel demanded emergency custody, claiming the couple recklessly subjected the minors to toxic methamphetamine and marijuana environments. A younger Sarah even penned a desperate, heartbreaking plea to escape to her father's custody. Outwardly, however, she maintained the convincing facade of a perfectly ordinary adolescent. A baptized pillar of the youth ministry and regular churchgoer, she even managed to secure her high school diploma prematurely at just 16. Her criminal record was completely spotless. When daybreak arrived on February 20th, 2025, the couple's 5-year-old daughter, Jay, stumbled upon their bullet-riddled corpses tangled in the bedsheets. Sarah dialed 911. Investigators found absolutely zero evidence of a break-in, and the murder weapon had mysteriously vanished. Authorities believe Sarah executed them both in cold blood, cruelly leaving the gruesome discovery for her little sister. Suspiciously, surveillance gear in the teen's bedroom was dismantled days beforehand, while the master bedroom's lens conveniently went blind. Soon after, she flooded TikTok with dramatic videos and gave a weeping funeral eulogy, a performance detectives viewed as unsettlingly rehearsed. Closing her bizarre tribute, she offered a chillingly simple apology. 5 months later, on July 8, 2025, she actively courted true crime influencers, urging one creator to investigate the infamous Brock slaughter. Once the arrest warrants dropped, the teenager finally surrendered. Why would an accused adolescent exploit the internet to broadcast her own massacre? The psychological implications are deeply unnerving. Tried as an adult, she absorbed twin murder and assault charges. By August 19, 2025, a grand jury slammed her with an 8-count indictment. The charges included dual counts of both malice and felony murder. She faced twin charges for severe assault and possessing a deadly firearm during a felony. Judge Dustin W. Hightower ruthlessly stripped away her bail in both August 2025 and January 2026. A desperate December plea to relocate the trial also failed. Courtroom proceedings were initially slated for that January. However, incomplete mental health evaluations forced a significant postponement, pushing the start date to August 3, 2026. The fractured family secretly inked a $100,000 documentary deal, aiming to cash in once the gavel fell, prosecutors unveiled. Standing firmly by her side, maternal grandfather Dennis Nolan fiercely maintains her innocence, noting the missing gun makes physical proof impossible. James's bloodline fiercely condemns her. Locked in Carroll County Jail isolation due to her youth, the teenager fiercely denies all guilt as of March 2026. As August 3, 2026 approaches, national legal networks have already crowned this grim spectacle as the year's most highly awaited showdown. The horrifying truth remains shrouded in shadows. While a verdict hangs in the balance, a jury must soon decipher the bloodshed that stained that Carrollton home. For Tyler Witt, it was dubbed a tragic Romeo and Juliet suicide pact. 14-year-old Tyler and her 19-year-old lover, Stephen Culver, meticulously plotted to slaughter the teenager's mother. Their dark fantasy involved escaping to San Francisco before mutually ending their own lives. While the murder succeeded, the suicide failed. The teenager shared an El Dorado Hills, California, residence with her 47-year-old mother, Joanne Witt. Joanne was a brilliant mechanical engineer and fiercely dedicated solo parent. A childhood physical altercation temporarily stripped Joanne of her parental custody rights. The child bounced between foster homes and relatives while her mother navigated mandated anger management. Once reunited, a fearful Joanne abandoned strict discipline, allowing her daughter's destructive behavior to wildly spiral. By December 2008, a coffee shop encounter introduced Tyler to Stephen Culver, ominously nicknamed Boston. Their physical romance ignited in February 2009. Facing homelessness, Culver moved in after Tyler manipulated her mother into believing he was exclusively homosexual and merely a sibling figure. By April 2009, Culver infiltrated the household, securing a room for a mere $500 monthly. Their dark descent began through a shared chemical haze of marijuana, ecstasy, and cocaine. Roughly a month later, Joanne discovered a nude Tyler hiding inside Culver's closet. Enlisting a family friend to forcibly eject him, she strongly contemplated pursuing statutory charges. Tyler swore the twisted romance was over, yet their clandestine meetings covertly persisted. The couple's mounting desperation hit a breaking point once Joanne handed Tyler's graphic journal to law enforcement. Inside his personal diary, Culver ominously penned, "It becomes an ultimate test when tasked with extinguishing another's life merely to remain beside your true love." Tyler drafted a macabre tale dubbed The Killer and His Raven, perfectly shadowing their impending plot. That fateful night of June 11th, 2009, Tyler served her mother a heavily drugged beverage before quietly unlocking the door for Culver. Together, they silently ascended the staircase. Tyler later claimed she lingered outside that bedroom, eyes shut tight and humming with hands over her ears as Culver struck. Still, she heard her mother desperately pleading for mercy. Joanne endured roughly 20 brutal upper body stab wounds, her hands bearing tragic defensive gashes. Forensics later extracted male genetic material from beneath her fingernails. Culver offered a chillingly different narrative. He insisted Joanne was already lifeless upon his arrival, finding Tyler gripping the bloodied blade, whispering, "Boston, I did it. I finally, truly did it." Shrouding the corpse and incinerating their clothes, the duo spent days visiting friends, darkening their hair to pitch black, and fleeing toward San Francisco. Hiding inside a rented motel room, they sought a cowardly exit, ingesting a toxic slurry of rat poison, breakfast cereal, and cake. Their grim suicide pact failed. When two suspects weave entirely conflicting narratives regarding who wielded the blade, how can justice possibly unearth the objective truth? Joanne's concerned employer flagged her sudden, uncharacteristic absence by June 12th. On June 15th, worried grandparents Norb and Judy Witt visited the residence, leading deputies to uncover the grisly scene. 2 days later, an off-duty cop recognized the fugitives roaming San Bruno. Authorities apprehended them lurking behind a Tan Foreign Mall dumpster, desperately attempting to change their garments. Crucial leverage emerged when companion Matthew Widman testified that Culver explicitly displayed the crimson-stained blade while verbally confessing. Further damning proof encompassed their dark journals, morbid suicide letters, and that male genetic trace beneath Joanne's fingernails. Tyler originally filed an insanity plea to dodge culpability. However, by September 2010, she secured a calculated plea agreement. Admitting to second-degree murder with those severe special circumstances dismissed, she secured 15 years to life, the price being her damning testimony against Culver. Culver faced his reckoning starting May 17, 2011, stepping into the El Dorado County Courthouse before Judge Daniel B. Proud. Prosecutor Lizette Suter strategically weaponized Tyler's betrayal, Widman's stark recollection, irrefutable biological forensics, and the pair's own morbid journals. Conversely, defense counsel Diane painted Tyler as a manipulative temptress, the genuine, cold-blooded architect behind the slaughter. On June 15, 2011, a haunting 2-year anniversary of the corpse's discovery, jurors required under 4 hours to convict Culver of first-degree murder involving special circumstances. Condemned to die behind bars without parole, Culver watched as Tyler officially received her promised 15-to-life sentence on August 12, 2011. Presiding Judge Proud chillingly observed a complete absence of genuine remorse in Tyler's calculated demeanor. Shockingly, by early 2026, records show Tyler Witt secured parole on August 26, 2022, having served roughly 13 years. Overriding the grieving Witt family's fierce protests, the board maintained her parole. 2023 saw her walk free from Chowchilla's Central California Women's Facility. Now, allegedly operating under the alias Charlie, she audaciously granted a post-prison podcast interview around February 2024. Meanwhile, Stephen Culver rots away inside Stockton's California healthcare facility, forever bound by his life sentence without parole. One roams completely free, the other remains eternally caged. The haunting mystery of who truly orchestrated this nightmare remains permanently unresolved. Now, consider Aaron Caffey. Digital telecom records ultimately emerged as the absolute most devastating nail in her chilling coffin. Spanning the midnight hour from 11:46 to 12:48, she dialed her lover, Charlie Wilkinson, 6 distinct times from within her family's very walls. Frantically demanding he hasten his arrival, she coldly volunteered to silence the family dog. As 4:30 approached that dawn, her mother and both brothers lay slaughtered, the entire residence consumed by a raging inferno. The Caffeys resided in Alba, an isolated Texan enclave housing roughly 492 souls within Rains County, nestled northeast of Dallas. Deeply entrenched in their devout faith, they were active pillars of the local Miracle Faith Baptist Church. 41-year-old patriarch Terry occasionally preached, while Penny, 37, anchored the congregation as their pianist. Young brothers Matthew and Tyler accompanied services on harmonica and guitar. Sheltered through 3 years of rigorous Bible-centric homeschooling, the children re-entered the public education system a mere 6 weeks before the impending bloodbath. Erin was just barely 16. While working at a local Sonic drive-in, she encountered 18-year-old Charlie James Wilkinson, a boy who quickly secured her devotion with a promise ring. Horrified upon unearthing Wilkinson's vulgar MySpace profile, riddled with illicit sex, booze, and profanity, her parents issued a strict ultimatum to sever all ties immediately. Feigning total submission, Erin manipulatively assured her father she had secretly desired to break off the toxic romance for quite a while, yet unsettled peers disclosed she openly broadcasted dark schemes to eliminate her own parents. Past romantic interest Michael Washburn disclosed she previously tried recruiting him for the slaughter, enraged by her family rejecting their bond. He vehemently declined. Undeterred, she and Wilkinson spent roughly 1 month orchestrating the bloodbath. In the dead of night, just past 3 o'clock in the morning on March 1st, 2008, Wilkinson and 20-year-old Charles Wade breached the quiet residence, wielding a .22 caliber handgun alongside a lethal samurai blade. Meanwhile, the teenage architect idled in a getaway vehicle nearby, alongside Wade's 18-year-old partner, Bobby Johnson. Warned by Wilkinson that her brothers must also die to eliminate witnesses, her chillingly apathetic response was simply, "I do not care. Just finish the job." Penny Caffey fell first, while Terry absorbed 5 brutal rounds, including a devastating bullet straight through his face. Helpless, he heard his boy Matthew agonizingly beg, "Charlie! Charlie, why are you doing this? No, Charlie!" Matthew and Tyler were mercilessly slaughtered. The intruders ransacked the property before igniting an inferno. Horrifyingly, forensic autopsies proved all 3 victims inhaled smoke, meaning they were still breathing when the inferno ignited. Defying 5 gunshot wounds, Terry dragged his shattered body out a window, enduring a grueling hour-long crawl toward his closest neighbor's property. A burning resolve kept him moving, the desperate need to expose Wilkinson's identity to authorities. How does a man survive knowing his own flesh and blood orchestrated his family's slaughter? Emergency dispatchers logged the agonizing 911 plea near 4:30 in the morning. From his trauma bed, the shattered patriarch officially named Wilkinson. Chief Deputy Kurt Fisher shuddered, realizing his own sons knew the assailant. Before nightfall, investigators captured the entire quartet hiding at Wade's trailer. The teenage mastermind initially fabricated a kidnapping narrative. Damning telecommunication logs shattered her alibi, compounded by separate admissions from both hitmen naming her as the sole architect. Court-ordered psychiatric assessments completely dismantled any defense of domestic trauma within the Caffey household. The legal hammer fell swiftly, slapping the murderous quartet with 3 capital homicide indictments each. In a stunning twist, the surviving father campaigned tirelessly against lethal injection, petitioning prosecutors and pleading that executing the guilty would never resurrect his shattered world. His psychological vengeance demanded they awaken every single dawn, permanently haunted by the monumental tragedy they authored. Facing insurmountable evidence, the entire group submitted guilty pleas. Trial avoided. On January 2nd, 2009, the mastermind accepted dual life sentences plus 25 years. In a staggering display of grace, her surviving father gripped her hand during sentencing. Her primary executioners received life without parole. Bobby Johnson absorbed a 40-year term, marking her calendar for a potential release hearing in March 2028. By early 2026, the slaughter's architect remains caged inside Marlin, Texas's grim William P. Hobby unit. Official penal documents delay her earliest freedom bid until March 1, 2038. 30 years post-bloodbath, lacking any release hearings, she frequently downplays her sinister orchestration in media interviews, brushing off the massacre as mere poor decision-making. A correctional expert meeting her behind bars painted a darker portrait, labeling the inmate highly deceitful and manipulative. Terry's extraordinary path toward pardoning his family's killers captivated the nation. Plunged into a deep, self-destructive abyss, his salvation came via a charred scrap from his late wife's literature, clinging to a branch near the ashes, a profound text discussing divine control. That singed fragment triggered an emotional resurrection. He officially pardoned the murderous trio, eventually remarrying and welcoming 4 new children. Dedicating himself to spiritual outreach, he has recounted his dark yet redemptive saga across roughly 600 schools and 800 congregations. Astonishingly, he still makes routine prison visits to his daughter. Certain tragedies lack neat conclusions, leaving only perpetual sorrow and incomprehensible mercy. Enter Jasmine Richardson. At a mere 12 years old, she became Canada's most juvenile offender ever convicted of multiple premeditated homicides. Unsettlingly, she currently roams society as a phantom with a fresh alias, her judicial past legally erased and whereabouts completely unknown. Her caretakers, 42-year-old Mark and 48-year-old Deborah Richardson, were individuals actively recovering from severe substance dependency. Successfully piecing their fractured world together, they migrated to Medicine Hat, Alberta, in 2005, spurred by Mark's promising career advancement. While her brother, Jacob, was just 8, the future killer masked her darkness as a stellar, fine arts-focused honor roll pupil at her parochial academy. Her descent began mid-2005, when chance encounters with senior adolescents at the Medicine Hat Mall pulled her deep into Gothic subculture. Her pristine demeanor rapidly deteriorated. She shattered dress codes, grew combative, and crafted digital alter egos faking her birth year, glorifying notorious murderers, and ominously broadcasting, "Welcome to my tragic end." The fatal catalyst arrived in January 2006, crossing paths with 23-year-old Jeremy Steinke, bridging a disturbing 11-year age divide. Steinke was a deeply fractured soul, harboring horrific childhood trauma, severe narcotic demons, and had abandoned formal education as a young teenager. Operating under bizarre delusions of being a 300-year-old werewolf, he sported a morbid blood pendant. Horrified, her guardians absolutely banned the toxic romance. In a chilling digital exchange, the girl typed her dark blueprint. Her exact words were, "The scheme starts with their slaughter and finishes with us being together." His disturbing response expressed deep admiration for the sinister idea, while casually suggesting they needed to inject more imagination into the finer execution details. By the 3rd of April, his digital footprint turned violent. On his Nexopia profile, he publicly fantasized about severing their throats, promising brutal vengeance. He demanded bloody retribution. Then, under darkness on April 22, 2006, the young girl quietly unlatched a subterranean window, inviting the nightmare inside. Drunk and chemically altered, the masked intruder slipped inside the dark home, firmly gripping a lethal blade. When Deborah came downstairs checking on a strange sound, the intruder inflicted a ferocious 12-strike assault, violently piercing her heart. Hearing the chaos, Mark lunged in, desperately wielding a screwdriver to strike the attacker's eye. Despite his valiant defense, the father suffered 24 fatal lacerations. As life faded, the bleeding father begged for a reason. The killer coldly replied it was his own daughter's request. The grim death of 8-year-old Jacob remains disputed. He blames the sister, while she insists she acted under his strict command. Forensic analysis indicates a gruesome joint effort. Heartbreakingly, the small child had tried to fend off the brutal assault using a plastic toy lightsaber. Amidst the slaughter, she calmly packed her wardrobe into a duffel bag. After draining cash from an ATM using her deceased mother's card, she took a cab to his trailer. By sunrise at a local gathering, her accomplice loudly bragged about slaughtering them like livestock. Chillingly, she corroborated this, noting her siblings' death rattles. What psychological shift turns a 12-year-old academic achiever into an active participant in an orchestrated family annihilation? The grim reality was uncovered on the afternoon of April 23rd. A neighborhood boy, arriving for a casual weekend playdate, peered through lower-level glass and found an unimaginable nightmare. Arriving authorities initially treated the missing daughter as a victim, triggering an urgent kidnapping broadcast. The investigative pivot occurred during a search of her middle school locker. Detectives unearthed a sinister doodle showing a female torching her burning family before fleeing toward a lover's waiting vehicle. Cyber footprints, spanning sinister messages, premeditated dialogues, and his macabre online diaries proved devastatingly essential. On April 24th, authorities ambushed the fugitive pair at a remote roadside store in Leader, Saskatchewan. They had fled 130 kilometers from the carnage. During transport, the primary suspect bragged to a secretly planted detective, "Heard about that local three-body slaughter? You are staring right at the architect. My girl and I just became immortal legends." The adolescent faced trial governed by the Canadian Youth Criminal Justice Act, establishing 12 as the absolute threshold for penal accountability. This framework shielded those under 14 from adult penalties, limiting incarceration to a single decade, and enforcing an ironclad media blackout regarding her real name. Press outlets were legally forced to identify her merely as J.R. By July 9, 2007, a swift 3-hour jury deliberation cemented her guilt across all 3 counts of premeditated slaughter. On November 8, 2007, Magistrate Scott Brooker delivered the harshest possible youth sentence. She received a 10-year mandate focused heavily on intense psychological rehabilitation, factoring in an 18-month deduction for time previously confined. This mandated 48 months inside a secure psychiatric ward, followed by 4.5 years of heavily monitored community reintegration. The presiding magistrate publicly stated it was nearly impossible to fathom a more horrific, cold-blooded atrocity. Psychologists diagnosed her with severe conduct and oppositional defiant conditions. Meanwhile, her older counterpart faced a separate courtroom reckoning in Calgary during November 2008. Convicted on every single charge, he was condemned to 3 simultaneous life terms, permanently locking away any hope of conditional release for a quarter century. He later adopted the alias Jackson May, framing this change as a tribute to his terminally ill mother. His absolute earliest chance at freedom arrives around 2031. Conversely, looking back from early 2026, the younger conspirator entirely fulfilled her decade-long judicial debt on May 6, 2016. During her final evaluation, Magistrate Brooker stunningly remarked that her slaughtered relatives would likely view her institutional progress with immense pride. By 2020, her dark dossier was legally erased, granted 12 months early thanks to unprecedented pandemic-era judicial shifts. Today, she walks Canadian streets completely unburdened, hidden behind a government-issued alias. The masses remain entirely blind to both her present location and the new name she goes by. Officials eventually praised her as the ultimate psychological reform success. In a staggering display, the murdered mother's brother pardoned the killer from the stand. This carnage forever fractured medicine hat, fundamentally rewriting the nation's legal approach to adolescent offenders. The bloodshed ignited a fierce philosophical war regarding the stark imbalance between profound adolescent rehabilitation efforts and the rigid 10-year incarceration ceiling for preteen killers. The older mastermind, now Jackson May, remains locked away inside Edmonton Institution. 10 shattered households, total devastation. While some of these female perpetrators will rot imprisoned, others freely walk among us. The grim details are bare. How you interpret this darkness rests entirely in your own hands. We appreciate your attention. Select the next file to continue.